Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Raj News. I am Adesuwa, Omoruan.
And I'm Rufai, Oseni. It's now 47 days since President Muhammadu Buhari was sworn into office for a second term, but his ministerial list still remains shrouded in secrecy and uncertainty.
Indeed. Well, some critics of the president have argued this delay at making public the cabinet list is a cause for concern and an indication that he is not really in charge. However, this is not the first time the president's cabinet would be a source of controversy. In his first term, it took about six months before his nominees were made known and sent to the Senate.
To shed more light on the continuous delay of the ministerial list is Babatunde Gbadamosi, a former Lagos State Governorship Aspirant in the 2019 elections.
But first, let's take a look at this report.
Selecting ministers have always been a very touchy issue in Nigeria's political antecedents. Although it is not supposed to be, when the role of a minister is to be able to administer the functions of government in various parastatals. But with the last dispensation taking about 6 months to be able to bring ministers in, this has become a touchy issue. And also owing to the fact that in this dispensation, the president, after over 2 months in power, has yet to send the names of ministers to the National Assembly. The President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, has said that President Muhammadu Buhari will submit a list of ministers for consideration and approval of the Red Chamber this week. Lawan also stated this at the plenary on Wednesday, explained that the executive arm was working hard to ensure that the list was ready early before the senators proceed on their annual 2-month recess. The President of the Senate was reacting to a point of order raised by Senator Basi Akpan to the effect of the delay in the submission of the list, and this could affect the holidays of the senator. Lawan, however, assured his colleagues in Nigeria that President Buhari, will send the list to the Senate before the week runs out. He also expressed confidence that the nominees will be screened by the upper chamber before the annual vacation will commence on July the 26th. Many watchers and many political analysts have gone to town as regards the possibility of this. They have constantly argued that this is not viable and this is not possible. In our conversation today, we explore ministerial screening and everything centered around getting viable ministers to pilot the affairs of various parastatals in the country, and also talk about sundry national issues.
Well, there you have it, and we're being joined in the studio now by Mr. Babatunde Gbadamosi, a former Lagos State Governorship Aspirant in the 2019 elections. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Adesuwa. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, you had that report. 47 days. But some will argue that, you have permanent secretaries heading the ministries. You are an advocate of public service working. Some have said, the president, is taking his time to be thorough. Is this much ado about nothing, this backlash and controversy about a lack of lists?
I completely disagree with the idea that perhaps the president is being somehow thorough. We saw what happened in his first term, as you rightly pointed out earlier, where he spent 6 months. Basically, he allowed the budget year to lapse before he actually announced his ministerial list. And so the budget was expended by civil servants and himself, which I think, in my opinion, runs contrary to the dictates of the Constitution. Now, for somebody that's had, let's say that prior to his election in 2015, he didn't quite understand the nuances of democratic governance, having been a dictator in the past. Let's allow him that. He's had 4 years experience of democratic governance. Many will disagree that, will disagree with his democratic credentials, given his conduct in that 4-year period. But for whatever it's worth, he's had 4 years as a democratically elected president. And that should have given him enough time to be able to identify amongst all the people swirling around him who is competent and who is not. And I expected that by the time he got announced as the winner of the last election, he would have already had a list of people that he wanted as ministers. It's to my shock that at this stage, at this point in time, after his swearing in, we're still talking about a ministerial list that still hasn't managed to materialize.
A lot of watchers are saying, no big deal. Why are they saying no big
deal?
Why are they saying no big deal? When you check across the country, that's the pervasive spread. I mean, Adesuwa, you're talking about the stats out of 29 governors sworn in. You can hardly have 5 that are set up their cabinet. Edo State, for instance, the House of Assembly has not been set up. There's a rigman role.
The president set a really bad precedent with his first term. He set a really bad precedent. And it's that precedent that the governors are following as well. There's a spread, a feeling, an air of lethargy in the country, largely stemming from Mr. President's own lethargy. We should not be running, a country with any type of ambitions the way Mr. President is running Nigeria. We should not. I mean, is it the security challenges we should be worried about? Is it the state of the economy? Is it our food security? All of these things are big issues that should have policy drivers driving them right now. And we don't.
The argument, in effect, like Adesuwa made earlier on, is civil servants still pretty much do the job.
Civil servants
permanent
work as directed.
Still
they do not
the
form
job.
initiatives.
So it's not the minister that... No. And when you look at the antecedents in this country,
yes,
the minister still gets go-ahead from the presidency. I mean, from the president. I mean, the presidency is another thing. The president, because look at the economic minister in the last dispensation. Despite
this particular president,
despite the indications, yes, it was still the body language of the president that prevailed concerning monetary policy.
Agreed,
so why are we deceiving ourselves?
This particular president has chosen to be a dictator. Okay? That's not the way the system is supposed to work. A more progressive-minded president would have worked the way, for instance, President Jonathan worked, the way President Obasanjo worked. That's how a democracy
Speaking
works.
of President Obasanjo, he was the petroleum minister. So
yes, he was.
He's the president
yes, he was, but
oversee the petroleum ministry?
He was far more competent than this particular petroleum minister. Far more competent.
How costly is this lack of ministerial list to us right now?
It's
can
costing
we put
us,
a finger to it?
It's costing us billions.
How can we ascertain
for instance,
that?
let's give you an example of the Minister for Trade and Industry. We don't have a Minister for Trade. There are tariff negotiations, taking place with the World Trade Organization and so on. And because we don't have a minister, there's nobody to represent us there. So tariffs are decided around the world. We don't get to, we don't get a word in edgeways, okay? And it's all these types of issues. Foreign affairs, our relations with other countries, things are being agreed, agreements are being made, bilateral agreements, unilateral agreements are being made across the world. We're absent.
But a lot of people tell you concerning
We're
trade.
invisible.
Concerning trade, very soon we'll not have a need for a trade minister because the AFCTA is going to be a joint negotiation front. So
again, our refusal to get involved, again, this comes back to the incompetence of this president. Our refusal to get involved in the negotiations for the AFCT has put us in a position where we're going to be lumped together with a bunch of people who worked out agreements that favored them. And we signed up later, after the negotiations were over. So we just take whatever we get. Okay, so it's necessary. In my opinion, the agreement should not have been signed when it was signed. Since we were not part of the negotiations, we should have stayed out of it and waited for, a later period, strengthen our economy, and then wait to negotiate with the rest of Africa. Because really, at the end of the day, the Nigerian economy is quite strong, if properly managed.
You were once a member of the PDP before you joined the ADP. President Goodluck Jonathan took over 20 days, between 20 days and about 32 days before he formed his cabinet.
Yes.
So tell us, because you've been a member of a major political party, how difficult really is it to put together a ministerial list, considering vested interest of the political party? Because the president last week did make mention of how the APC played a role in drawing up his first-term list. And he says, you know, quite a lot of them I did not know, but these names were given to me by the party, and I had to work with that. How difficult is it with the party's interests? And what do you think is responsible for this delay?
I personally think that that's just another example of President Buhari refusing to take responsibility for anything. That has always been his character. He's never, ever, ever taken responsibility for anything that goes bad anywhere he works, anywhere he finds himself. It's always somebody else to blame. You know, he appointed these ministers. He's the president, he's the executive president of Nigeria. Okay? So if the APC people brought in people whose pedigree he was not cognizant with, then it was his prerogative to decide to not appoint them, since he didn't know them. It's too late in the day for him to start making excuses about, oh, I didn't know this guy or I didn't know that guy. He has all the apparatus of the federal government of Nigeria at his disposal to be able to, you know, draw up dossiers on every individual that is brought to him. He has the resources of Nigeria to call upon to be able to draw up a list of competent Nigerians from around the world that he can appoint as ministers. And that's what President Jonathan did in his time. He drew up, you know, he got lists of people. It was a headhunt. They went out, got lists of people from all over the place, and they vetted everybody before they started appointing people. And you saw the difference. You saw that these guys, when they went to work, within 4 years, Nigeria was the largest economy in Africa.
But Nigeria still did not return them to power after 4 years.
Unfortunately, people fell for the, propaganda.
But I think my question there, sorry, Rufai, is the role of the political party. I've not really gotten an answer there. How important is the role of the political party? Because that seems to be...
It depends on the sitting president. Okay? If the sitting president decides that the political party is going to decide who his ministers will be, then, you know, we'll be caught in that bind. And if the sitting president decides and says to the political party, look, bring me people, but bring me competent people, that puts a different spin on the matter if he insists on competence. And I think in President Jonathan's case, he was quite fortunate that he was in a party, and even though I'm not a member of the PDP anymore, I left for certain reasons that are not necessarily to do with the party's competence at running government. It was more to do with the political side. Okay? But in terms of the administrative capacity of the people running government under PDP at the time, I think that everybody focused on getting technocrats, on getting people who knew what they were doing. So you got people from the private sector. A lot of people disagree with the choice, for instance, of Princess Stella Odua. But I think she was an excellent choice because this was an entrepreneur who had built up her own business, you know, from whatever it was to a multi-million dollar business. Okay? So in terms of competence, President Jonathan seems to me to have picked people who had records of achievement from wherever.
Okay, let me come in here. I mean, we're talking about President Buhari's administration, not President Goodluck Jonathan's administration. That was 8 years ago, and so I mean, I just wanted to that was 4 years ago. I mean, I just wanted to correct the air of the economy became the bigger after rebasing. We rebased the economy, so the economy was potentially big. I just wanted to correct that impression.
But after rebasing, now it's gone down again.
Yeah, so let's talk about inclusion. The governor of Oyo State, Governor Makinde, did something recently, brought people from other political parties to be part of his cabinet. Yes. Is that a way to go for the president of the country? Because while we're hearing all these conversations going on, it looks as though it's only like a one-party thing.
If we're talking about competence, it's best to cast your net.
We'll be right back after this quick commercial time.
Okay.
Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Rise News. We're still discussing the president's ministerial list, or the absence of it, with former governorship aspirant, actually candidate in Lagos State, Babatunde Gbadamosi, Thank you so much for staying with us.
Thank you.
All right, so before we went on that break, I was talking about inclusion,
Yes.
for other parties in the cabinet. What's your take on that?
Well, I personally think that it still comes down to the character of the individual making the appointments. If that individual feels like it's necessary to douse the tension in the polity, and in doing that, we must reach across the aisle, the political divide,
Okay.
to appoint people that have necessary competence.
Mr. Gbadamosi, we'll have to go to South Africa now, where former President Jacob Zuma is in the stand for the state capture inquiry.
The investigations were going on. NPA was confronted by the tapes, which indicated they've been planning, conspiring to charge me with politicians and everybody else. The tapes are now a public thing. To an extent that when the head of NPA at the time came to know about these tapes, decided to withdraw the charges, and therefore had no case against me then. Not because of anything.
Right, that's the voice you're hearing there of the former president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, facing this anti-corruption case for quite a while. I mean, there's been the scandal of state capture currently going on with the Guptas, a very prominent Indian business family in South Africa, and there's been a lot of back and forth as regards our resources of state was expended. There were some other allegations, many allegations, in fact, about his conduct while he was president, upgrading of his home in Nkandla. That was a big scandal in South Africa then. And only today, a report came out that he was pictured somewhere in the internet laughing and saying, oh, they want to, investigate me and ask me questions. And he was just laughing and making very, cookie faces. Zuma must fall. And he said Zuma must fall himself. Let's see how this pans out in the coming days. But the incumbent president, Cyril Ramaphosa, had said that, he's going to fight corruption head-on, especially case of state capture. In fact, this was a prelude to Cyril Ramaphosa becoming president and beating Nkosazana Lamini Zuma at the leadership contest of the ANC back in December, a couple of years back. So we're seeing this, and we're going to see how it pans out in the coming days.
He's claimed innocence in all the allegations, and he has featured quite prominently. I mean, right now we have about 5 witnesses naming him, tying him directly to these corruption allegations. But he claims innocence. We'll see how it goes.
I mean, this case has been on for quite a while. I mean, we all know that it was this corruption case that destroyed the reputation of a very important public relations company in the world, Bell Pottinger. Yes. And because they were doing some work for KPMG and the Guptas in South Africa. Yes. And, it's been on for some time. So we're going to see in the coming days how it pounds off for South Africa.
Let's go back to our discussions here. Recently, before the break, Rufai mentioned the state governments as well have not, absence of cabinets all across the Federation. Yes. Lagos State, during the weekend, announced that it has transmitted names, 25 names to the State House of Assembly. I don't know if you've seen that list. What did you make of it? I mean,
well, it's hard to tell who these people are. One thing for sure is that list would have been vetted somewhere in Ikoyi.
How are you sure about that? You make a lot of this.
I'm absolutely certain.
Just make a lot of this hallelujah claims.
Yeah, in Ikoyi. Ikoyi
but we're in Ikoyi. It could be vetted in here.
I'm absolutely certain that list would not have emerged if Bodilon had not approved it.
That's one of the longest roads in Ikoyi.
Yes, it is.
So where in Bodilon? I mean, you're saying Bodilon.
If you're a Lagosian, you know exactly where.
I mean, tell me, I don't know. I have an international audience watching me in America, in London, in the UK,
well,
in parts of Brazil.
If the godfather of Lagos politics, of APC politics, had not approved that list, it would not have emerged. So every single person there owes their presence to the godfather of APC politics in Lagos.
A lot of people are saying it's just sour grapes. You were beaten blue black in the elections. You had less than 1,000 votes.
We all know now from
the
proceedings at the tribunal, at the Presidential Elections Tribunal, that we didn't have an election. It was simply an exercise in anointing.
But why didn't you go to court?
Because I don't have the resources that Mr. Atiku does. I don't have those kind of resources. I mean, election petition lawyers charge in the hundreds of millions, and I'm not prepared to spend my customers' funds on that type of pursuit, especially when you're not actually sure. I mean, look at what happened to Adeleke in Osun State. Despite all the obvious evidence, all the pictorial, video evidence that there was actually malpractices. Okay, we saw video evidence of people exchanging money before voting. We saw video evidence of people being beaten up by thugs. We saw all of that. Okay, and yet, somehow, the tribunal managed to arrive at the decision they arrived at. The Supreme Court arrived at that decision because a judge failed to mark the register. I mean, come on.
Technicalities. But
yes.
with every election cycle, especially in Lagos,
if you're going to spend that kind of money.
Mr. Gbadamosi, with every election cycle in Lagos, what we have seen is that there's a lack of viable opposition. I wonder if your party, ADP, is filling that gap.
I really don't know.
Or are we waiting for the next? Are we waiting for the next election?
I really don't know what the media wants in terms of viability. I think the question really should be thrown back to the media. And what you celebrate as, call it political sagacity, call it political viability, whatever. I mean, is it a prerequisite of viability that you are able to muster violence? Because that's what the APC did at the last election. Is it a prerequisite of being called a viable political party that you are able to cheat at the elections, to pay people for their votes,
and after the elections,
to overvote?
But hang on a minute.
Is that one of the qualities of a viable political party?
We don't want to wait this, but the truth is.
So the truth is the media is not asking the right questions. But that is the truth.
What is the right question? Because I am talking post-election.
Yes.
What we see is that every other party goes to sleep, and we don't hear from them till elections.
Well,
so it's 4 years.
I have not been quiet.
As an individual. How about your political party? I'm yet to see any ADP, anything.
No, they've not been quiet either.
Okay, so what you're saying in effect is this. I just want to get this because we don't want to whip it too much. In an open election, you say you would have won, but the gap was so much. I mean, you got less than 1,000 votes.
When somebody sits somewhere,
how many people even know the logo of your party?
To write the election results, the results you see mean nothing. They're utterly meaningless.
So they gave you.
Yes,
in Nigerian parlance, when a child doesn't do well in school, they say they gave me. So they gave you 900 votes. That's what you're saying.
No, they gave me, I think, 4,000 votes or something.
4,000. So they gave you 4,000 votes.
Listen, I would never countenance those votes as the actual votes. I would never. I mean, for instance, let's look at the pattern of voting from the presidential election to the gubernatorial election. At the presidential election, people were intimidated, people were beaten up, ballots were set on fire, okay? People were harassed. And so at the gubernatorial elections, when we all came out, did you see the same number of people? No.
No, there was voter apathy.
There was voter apathy. And yet, when they added up the results of the gubernatorial elections, we still came up with more or less the same total that we had at the presidential election. What does that tell you? What does that tell you?
So why didn't you go to the court? Why didn't you go to the
tribunal? Because, like I said, I do not have the resources to spend.
And so that we don't just lose sight of our main focus today, it's the ministerial list. As we wait, this waiting game continues. Nobody has an idea. Even the president of the Senate, who we thought, had an idea of when that list was coming, said he was quoted out of context. He was responding to a motion on the ground. But as we wait, let's set an agenda, if you will. What would you like to see?
If wishes were horses,
they're not.
Beggars would ride. In Buhari's case, the best thing is just to sit down, look, and wait for him to go through whatever rigmarole he wants to go through, pull whatever surprises he wants to pull. Let everybody just rest their chins on their hands like this.
But we must set an agenda.
And let him finish whatever he's doing. Let him finish his 4 years, or let the tribunal kick him out.
No, but
whichever.
You know, you're always pushing it to the media. The media is telling you now.
No.
Set an agenda. And this, the media, you have the chance.
Set an agenda for what purpose? Agenda was set for him 4 years ago. What did it amount to?
But this is
Everybody says,
a new dawn.
General Buhari is coming. He's going to secure the country. Boko Haram is going to be over. The next thing we knew, Dapchi happened. Leah Sharibu is still there, over 500 days in the hands of Boko Haram, just because she's a Christian. All the other girls were released because they are Muslims. And this president is not saying anything about that.
So that's
the agenda was set
agenda
for him to fight corruption. This president saw video of a governor taking dollars in bribes, and he did nothing about that governor. In fact, he began to celebrate him. This president has a sitting governor who is now going back to run to
But that governor
seek
was
re-election.
re-elected by the people.
Wait, come on. You really believe that? You really believe that?
But that's the result that was released by the people.
Well, those results are being contested, aren't they? The results of these last elections are being contested very vigorously across the country. Okay, and that tells you this is the most contested, the most legitimate, what's the English? Legitimate elections in the history of Nigeria. It's the most. No election has ever been legitimated as much as this one.
Okay, so let's set an agenda for trade, for instance. You spoke about trade and investment. What will you say will be the role of a minister for trade and investment?
We should not be talking about liberalizing trade at this stage, but unfortunately, that's what we have to do. We have to liberalize trade. We have to take our fingers, our grubby fingers, off control of foreign exchange. Okay, the foreign exchange trade. We need to take our grubby fingers off that and allow trade to go on. We need to look again at our tariffs, at our import tariffs, at our export tariffs. We need to look at the conduct of our officials at the ports.
Okay, we'll quickly go on a quick break. We'll come back and talk about this and more. All right, welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. So we're still talking to Babatunde Gbadamosi, former Lagos Governorship candidate after ADP in the 2019 elections. And we're talking about ministerial lists and sundry national issues. But quickly, we'll move to South Africa. The questioning is on with Jacob Zuma, and we hear feelings that he's getting a little upset while he's answering questions.
Agitated.
Now, we don't think he should go to prison. We think that we should find a way to make him leave the work that he's doing and retire, go to Nkandla, and would want to look after him. So we wanted to come and talk to you as a comrade, as a business. Can you help give us some money to do so? This is said by these two comrades, Tumzi Kumalo, who now relates this to me. And he says, I said to them, how much? I'm fine, I can do it, but how much? They said, we'll come back to you. But he says they never came back. But again, the rumor that was going in the corridors that Zuma must be made to resign and go to Nkandla becomes a reality, confirmed by the discussion between Mzi Kumalo and them. So as I said earlier, it was a rumor, but this was confirmed very firmly. No one has ever come to me to say, could you go home and stay? But it moves around. People try to find something that can make Zuma disappear. And therefore, many other things, including the coming into being of this commission, influenced by this. And people who are participating are not aware of that.
All right, there you heard former President of South Africa, the Republic of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, making an explanation about the first rumor, that heralded his leaving, about a certain comrade saying that Zuma will have to go back to his country home in Kandla while the scandal did break. And we all know that metamorphose to be true. The scandal did break, led the ANC to another leadership struggle between his wife and Cyril Ramaphosa, the incumbent president, that finally consolidated his mandate with the last elections in the Republic of South Africa. This is going to last for the next 5 days. I mean, it's going to be grilled and lots of questioning here and there, and lots of investigation as regards this. And
he says he's a victim of political witch hunts. He has repeatedly said that he's innocent of all the charges. Yeah, we've seen the video of him making a mockery of the entire situation. But he has presented himself to be tried on television, on national television, to prove his innocence. And like you rightly said, this will last the entire week. Yeah. And so we see how
We'll see how it does. We'll see how he responds. I mean, this is not the first of its kind. We're going to see leaders being put to open trial. I mean, we all remember those pictures back in 2000, early 2000, when Saddam Hussein was tried openly on television. In fact, his execution was beamed live on television worldwide. We forget that in a hurry. That's the first execution on television. But we're going straight back to you right about
Lack
now.
of ministerial list. We're setting an agenda. Talking about corruption, because it's all linked here in South Africa, the brazen corruption that the country has seen, especially under President Jacob Zuma. And in recent times, we've seen African leaders try to tackle corruption as a united front. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has made that one of his 3 cardinal promises to Nigerians.
Well, he certainly talks about it a lot.
Let's set an agenda for that. What do you see in the next 4 years?
Well, we'd like to see President Buhari live up to his words as far as the fight against corruption, because he hasn't, frankly. Let's be frank. If you are a member of the APC, I mean, in fact, the chairman of the APC notoriously made an announcement that was televised live, I think, where he said, if you are corrupt and you join the APC, your sins are forgiven. That they could be so brazen about that tells the whole story. I mean, there's nothing more to be said. If you are a member of the APC, you can steal Nigeria blind if you want. Nothing will happen to you. And
but he said that's not what he meant. He came out and said that's not what,
we're not soothsayers. We're not magicians. We're not going to enter his head. We're not telepaths. We can only go by what he said. And this is what he said. So whatever it is he meant is what he should have said. He's not a child that we should be telling the chairman of the APC.
I mean, what's your quick take
how
on
to express himself?
Case?
That's the
Danjuma Goje's case for Senate President Aspirant.
Oh, the one who went to see Buhari and then 30 days later his case was thrown out of court. Is that the one you're talking about?
Danjuma Goje, yeah.
Yeah, that tells its own story as well, doesn't it? He went to sue Buhari, and 30 days later, his case was gone.
No, but people are saying the Attorney General saw him newly prosecute because the EFCC didn't have a viable case against him.
That's my response.
47 days and counting. The first term, it was 6 months. When do you think that this list will be making it to the Senate?
Well, the Senate seems very optimistic that it will come out this week.
Okay.
And,
are you optimistic?
No, I'm not. But my advice to Nigerians is to expect the worst, and hopefully we'll get better than that.
Okay,
but Ahmed Lawan said cold. He didn't say will come out this week. He said cold.
shows you he's not particularly too optimistic.
Fingers crossed on the ministerial list. Thank you so much, Mr. Gbadamosi, for being on the show this morning.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.